Good morning and hello. Welcome to another episode of AMA Puget Sound's Coffee Talk series. It's been a couple of weeks, but I'm happy that we're here today, the last day of the fiscal year. And today we have Marth. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Where are you located? I don't think we're that far from each other.
No, my office is set up in downtown Tacoma, pretty close to the Tacoma Dome. So that's kind of where we're headquartered at.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm sitting in my home office in Buckley, Washington, up by the mountain.
Oh, is it out today?
Oh, yeah. It's out more often here. That's why I'm here.
Excellent. Excellent. I have to go for a drive if I want to go see it. I'm in Renton Highlands. If anybody is from the King County area, King Pierce counties, that's where we are covering AMA Puget Sound. So we're here today to talk about websites, inclusivity, accessibility. And so it's a very, very, very important topic. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Can you kind of talk about those quick?
Yeah. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was passed in 1990 and went into effect into 1992. You'll hear a lot around accessibility litigation around ADA Title III, kind of just specifies around all types of businesses and how they have to comply for their customers and their employees. And then the WCAG is part of something that the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, put together. They've always, since the beginning, have been developing different web standards around certain things. And the WCAG is kind of their accessibility guidelines on how, basically around a couple things. The websites need to be perceivable, they need to be operable, understandable, and robust. So they're just kind of making sure there's good quality, accessible content out there for the vast variety of people trying to access that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you, the ADA has been around now 30 years, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise for anybody. But so those those two acts, who do they benefit?
I'd argue that they benefit everybody. And it's tricky. What kind of led me down the path of trying to dig into this information is it's a bit vague. And it comes down to that created in 1990. What was going on in the web in 1990 versus right now? Completely different. And so it is a bit vague because of that. And so trying to figure out where we need to sit and what we need to do, I think it just comes down to ultimately being able to make your content available to the vast variety of people, and make sure that you aren't excluding people, not only for just getting your information to people, but I think for myself, I feel like it's adding to the greater good of not only the web, but just the world looking out for each other, and that piece. So I think a lot of people get into it first off because they just want to get sued, which is very, it's possible. And there's numbers and stats that show that that is a concern worth warranting that concern. But I kind of land on just the empathy side of things. When you really start digging into the data of how many people in the US that or globally that have a recognized disability and how they're trying to interact the world. It's staggering, and what we're providing them on the website isn't cutting it when you look at those stats. And that's not even going into just the economics of people that have too many other things to worry about in their world besides going to a website that doesn't work for them, or just they don't have access. I mean, even the privilege of having access to a smartphone isn't something that everybody has. So.
Right, exactly. And so it's so funny that we're talking about this because for how long, just even saying you need to have your website be convertible to mobile, and we're still, like you just said, not even everybody has access to mobile. So
yeah, or the broadband speeds, parts of the country to even access your content. So it's a little interesting. I mean, in what we do, I mean, I work at a full service digital agency where we have web projects coming in, but also marketing, brand identity packages, those kinds of things. And when we aren't talking in the initial stages, the websites kind of tends to be at the end of a process and a marketing plan. I can't tell you how many branding guidelines come through or ideas come through, and then I'm having to then kind of teach how important some of these things are and
Yeah.
how you can't just kind of shiv them in there without it feeling kind of
Mhm.
what I call a yard sale, kind of just pieces all over versus a cohesive marketing plan, right?
Right, exactly. And we were talking before the show. Uh, like we've actually worked together and we didn't even know it. Several
It's
years
true.
ago, I worked for an organization, for a nonprofit organization, the Washington State PTA. And I was joking around that the website had we not hired you, it would still be the way it was. And I kid you not, it was a website that was created with a service that doesn't exist. It was HTML code. It was not responsive to mobile, and it was not a SaaS. It was it was like downloaded onto a terminal. And just I remember those early conversations with your company of trying to get a board of people with no marketing experience, no web experience, and trying to get them to understand how navigation is important and how the colors, yeah, it has to stay with brand guidelines, but at the same time, the font has to be with brand guidelines, but it has to be readable. And so I was just
Mhm.
curious, like I can't imagine. I'm sure you could go on for hours about different stories that you have. And so just my little experience, like yeah, there are so many pieces to a website. I mean, that you wouldn't even think of if you're not in it. I know Squarespace they're trying to do a better job, which is great for drag and drop, but just to build a website from scratch
Yeah, it's
without.
tough. And
Mhm.
we're in a spot, I mean, now it's just a given. I mean, I was doing it for myself once I kind of dug down this path. I would just take the brands, colors to start, and I would just overlap them in any different way that they could be done. Sometimes exactly how they're shown in some of the concept pieces in the
Mhm.
brand guidelines, and breaking down contrast ratios, seeing what passes, what doesn't, just so that I could quickly go to the key design on that point. And then I just found out that this is a tool they need to see. They need to realize that 10% of their brand passes. And so we have gotten good. It's not an easy task, but we've gotten good in what we're doing to still present that brand in a way that passes, but still
Mhm.
has all the brand elements in some capacity. But sometimes it gets pretty challenging to tie directly into other marketing materials because it just,
Mhm.
they don't line up.
Right, right, because some of those guidelines were written so long ago that
Or not.
or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. So kind of moving on from that, what should marketers ask designer agency partners about compliance with ADA and WCAG? Like just moving forward, especially if they're aware of it. Like,
Yeah.
because
One,
there's
if you're aware of it, kudos. Like that's the big thing. I always say just, I mean, for me, it was as simple as I wasn't thinking about it early on. And then I think around 2019, it just started all the design conferences back when we went to those things. And there was always talk about it was coming up and important, but yet there was no like, here's the guidelines, fonts need to be this size,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. Um, so just really trying to, okay, this is important. What can I do with where I am at now? For me, it was just starting those conversations internally with my company as far as where we want to sit, what I'm seeing is important, get on the same page, starting those conversations with the clients, making sure they're thinking about it right in the beginning. So I think my advice first on, I'm hoping everyone takes away, just start thinking about it. Where are you right now? There's always a spot you can start. But the big piece is getting that conversation front of mind because you can't have a cohesive plan that includes that after as an afterthought really
Right.
well. But then there's pieces where, a whole website redesign, there may not be budget to do that right now. And there's
Mhm.
pieces of just how you organize your content and how
Mhm.
you um, adjust the fluidity of just the hierarchy of the page and how you lead a viewer's eye down the page. Those things help and they matter. One step that I was surprised to find is that I think 50% of U.S. Americans, they can only read at an eighth grade level.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, forget color contrast, forget about the big ticket items. If you're not writing at that level, it's missing 50% of the people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It is. I took a journalism class 20 years ago, and I was told newspapers write for the sixth grade education, and that was 20 years ago. I can't imagine. I can't even imagine, and that depressed the hell out of.
Well, then you think about the web's its own thing too. It's not a
Yeah.
book, and most of
Yeah.
us, myself included, like I'm skimming, I'm just getting right to the piece I need, getting out of there. I land on a page that's wall-to-wall text. I'm like, nope, and I move on.
Nope.
So, but to answer your question, when you're dealing with an agency, say that's in charge of this, I think it's that piece of having that conversation. Make sure that they're thinking about it, because I'm sad to say that a lot of them aren't.
Mhm.
Even when we're working sometimes with third-party agencies and building things that were already designed, there's concerns and red flags we have to bring up and talk about because it wasn't there. And then there's a full level of testing that can happen. So you can find out, one, are you thinking about this? Are you testing for this? What does that look like?
Mhm.
If so, is there anything beyond just some of the automatic tools online, or do you like site
Yeah.
crafting? We have a whole testing lab, so we can bring in users, we can test a lot of things. And maybe that's not required for every project, but you kind of want to find out how far is your partner into this
Mhm.
world, and how are they thinking about it, and how are they guiding you in that process. So
Yeah.
great questions to ask. And then also, I from the design side, I would just love people. Most people that are in this process and meeting me, they have a brand guidelines already. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to guide them on what's passing, what's not. I recommend, if you've got a partner picking up part of the project, run those guidelines by them through that filter. I mean, you've already got them there working with you. They can kind of let you know. I
Mhm.
mean, you might find out slam dunk, it all passes. You might find out that, hey, here's 2, 3 things that I would change. So
Mhm.
then, maybe you aren't at the spot of a full rebrand. Might
Mhm.
not be as bad as you think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It might just be like, oh, you just have to do a little dusting and you're fine.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
think about that in like 2, 3 years and kind of plan for that. But yeah, it's kind of like, what is the little things that you can do right now that make it easier? And I'm curious, what is your thought on, I'm starting to see this on websites now, changing the font where like the first few letters of the word are bolded or emboldened, and then the rest of the word is kind of the regular font. And it's to help people, I believe people who have dyslexia and
Hmm.
folks who who may have like me ADHD, and just kind of like your eyes are just kind of like, yeah, I'm excited to read this, but my eyes kind of go everywhere. But it's to help anchor. And I thought this is really cool. I didn't like it at first, but now I'm like, ooh, this is nice. I'm able to just stay focused now. So I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that. If you've
I
seen it.
haven't heard of that, but that's really interesting, not only for the dyslexia portion of things, which I haven't delved into a lot, but just the fact that you gravitated to it and enjoyed that. So it's definitely something I want
Mhm.
to look into. I think
Yeah.
where we get into is, I don't know how many times the answer is, we want to get our point across. Let's use every headline style we have. And then let's also throw in a red override so that it screams it. And then people will definitely get the point. And then what you got on a page is, it's a bunch of yelling in
Mhm.
collage form, and it's like
Mhm.
so hard to kind of scan, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think what we generally do on our end is just really try and, sometimes have a leader headline that's 2 or 3 lines that can kind of get that main point, and then bullet points, if you can, to kind of reiterate that, small chunks of broken up pieces of content.
Mhm. Brevity.
Yeah. 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 They're only reading 10% of what you're putting on there. So make it easy for them and make sure the 10% is what you want them to hear. Right. I mean, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. I mean, there's a time to import a story. There is a time and a place to do that. And sometimes people just need that information, you
Yeah.
know.
And that's a challenge too, because sometimes you have a project and they want to put everything in there. And so there's times where you have to have a page of text that covers some things. But there's things like, you know, you lead people through that journey from the homepage to maybe some
Mhm.
landing pages where you tease some of the content, and then they can dive in right to what they want. So when they land on that page, it's the content they need, and they're
Yeah,
going to spend the time there for sure.
exactly. It's okay to break things up, basically. It's
Yeah.
okay, yeah, to have a parent page and then some child pages where you break it up because, yeah, you want people on your website, but you don't want them angry they can't find what they're looking for. So yeah, you might have good rate of people staying on your website, but they're going to bounce out.
Right.
And they're not going to be
Right.
happy about it. So
Yeah.
it's think about your customer and the journey that they're going through on your website. So I love what you've been saying about all of that. Um, Yeah.
And all that, just to reiterate the kind of the main point of the topic is, I mean, it makes it easier for screen readers. It makes it easier for people with disabilities. And I think the biggest takeaway I took from this is, one, just empathy, that there is no normal, right?
Right.
My normal is different than your normal. And
Mhm.
then also that you've got to just, when you solve for, basically there's a saying that came across, like, if you solve for one, you extend it to the many. And a perfect example I came across was in 2015 with Facebook putting subtitles on their videos.
Mhm.
And the engagement went through the roof. And not only that, for the amount of people being able to access that with disabilities, I'm
Mhm.
sure you're like me. I mean, I rarely have the audio on. I actually, like, turn that off. And then I just go through it. And people are
Mhm.
um, twice as engaged in following that all the way through to the end,
Yeah.
versus just bouncing out if it has that subtitle. So it really does help everybody when we think about these demographics.
Right, exactly. Even from our own channel, when I go through, I make sure that there are subtitles. Granted, we don't have anybody. We're a nonprofit. We're a volunteer organization, but we do have the automatic subtitles on because I'm the same way. I need to have subtitles when I'm watching a movie because sometimes it's really loud. You can't hear the people because it's loud.
Mhm.
And so I definitely try to have the subtitles on for our videos, but it's automatic. So
Nice.
sometimes
Yeah,
but if anybody out there wants to do some volunteer work and actually do the scripts for us, that'd be great.
we need you.
Very much so. I promise. So then when should marketers be updating the content? I mean, obviously 3 days ago, but in,
Yeah.
in reality.
I think that, well, our ideal scenario when we're talking web projects, I mean, the best is you're always in a continual
Mm,
process of revising, right? The days of being able, it used to be about 10 years ago, if you were doing actual business through your website, you needed to redo that website every 5 years.
mhm,
And I think even now that is a stretch for some people, which is kind of scary. And you really need to, with the way it's changing constantly, you need to always
mm,
be working through it continually, addressing things, updating things, and the content is no difference.
mm.
There'll be so many times we'll do site audits for a new project, and there's 100 pages that nobody's even looked at in forever, and it's just sitting there eating up bandwidth, searchable, and people don't know about it, and we
Mhm.
don't want to get to that spot.
Right, exactly. So just say for a small team, and I'm saying this from my own personal experience, having done marketing team of one, and you're doing everything, or even if you're in a small team, how often should you be auditing your website? Just on your own before you'd hire somebody.
um, I have my own thoughts on it. I mean, we have specialized groups at site crafting that kind of handle those specifics. But I would say that, one, you're always kind of monitoring what's going on. One, is the content on there relevant to your messaging and what needs to even be there, is kind of that top level. How it's formatted, readable, along the lines of the ADA stuff, making sure that it flows nicely and you don't have extra stuff there for extra stuff's sake. But then I think I mean, really utilizing like Google Analytics
Mhm.
to just kind of monitor what pages are people going to, what's important, what's not. If you have a page that's really important to the CEO that's got zero traffic, I mean, you now have data, which is kind of the only thing that can help that argument in that case, to be like, hey,
Mhm.
we should get rid of this.
Yeah.
People don't like seeing pictures of your cat. I don't know, but there's just things like that that can help monitor it. I mean, and of course, I got to do the plug of, like, I mean, this is stuff we help people with all the time. Sometimes there's just not people on staff available to address everything, even down to writing the content. I mean, it is a task. And I tell people too, when they ask me about ADA stuff, it's like, there's no way I can do it all. I mean, if you go through the guidelines online, I mean, you're looking at a dictionary, and it really takes a team. So to think that you can just have your volunteer hop in here once a week, and
Mhm.
manage social, and there's just no way to do it and do it well. So you really got to be specific and targeted.
Yeah, and if you are a team of one, you almost have to set aside like a week. It's like, nobody bug me for a week. There are no problems for this week because I am focused on the website and making sure that it's up to date. And yeah, I'm seeing websites where it's like, okay, you clearly haven't updated it since 2017 because at the bottom of on the footer it says 2017. You're like, oh dear.
Or you see that the big counter there, or things like that were, you got the little dancing dolphin or the construction guy, and you're like, oh yeah, that's modern.
Oh, right? I haven't seen one of those in years. Or banner ads. Oh god, golly. Yeah, so like if it's been a couple of years, you should do it. If you've got a website out there and you forgot about it, take a peek at it. There might be some traffic, or take it down. Yeah,
or consult with somebody that can give you an idea. I mean, I think aside from content, there's other pieces that can let you know if it's time to look at things. I mean, if your site isn't responsive and not viewable on a phone, I mean, there's a red flag. If you're still using fonts within your images for headlines and things, that's not readable text, searchable text. It's an image. And when it does come down on somebody's phone that they're pinching and zooming, it's not doing the job it needs to do. So there should be lots of red flags prior to that. But if you have a site that you've updated somewhat recently and you're looking right now, what can I do around content and keeping up on it? Just know that it's a continual thing you got to keep an eye on, and just make sure stuff that is there needs to be there. Stuff that isn't, remove it.
Exactly. So we've been talking a lot about, the hows and whats, but we haven't really talked too much about the why. I mean, we have, but I kind of want to get into the meat of it. Why is this important? Why is it necessary for accessibility and inclusion on a website? We touched on it at the top of the show, but really to kind of lay it out, I mean, we know, but there are some people still that they need some convincing. So how do you talk to those folks?
Yeah, and I kind of broke it down. Like the big one is just that we don't want to get sued, and it's a thing. So yeah, that's a great reason if you stop there. But I kind of, like I mentioned, go into the empathy side of things. When you start realizing how many people can't access your content, I mean, it's staggering. And beyond that, like the amount of spending power that people group has, I mean, that's a lot of money you're leaving on the table. It's crazy. So I think that to do good business and really make sure we're taking advantage of every opportunity we can, that business side is there. But I think that if we aren't sitting in that spot of empathy for others, and a lot of it is me speaking for my own journey on that. It wasn't until I got to that spot and looked at how other people were looking at things. It didn't really, it then sculpted my view of everything, if that makes sense. And so if we start from that point, the money aspect, the business aspect comes, but I think that we're selling ourselves short if it's just like, we want to make more money, let's do this. We don't want to lose money, let's not get sued. I mean, it seems a little short-sighted, and just the way the web is now. I think it just comes down to how can we make it better. I mean, as a designer, that's kind of why we get into it. We want to make things pretty, we want to make things better, make our stuff seen by more, not less. And I think it's just common sense at that point for those pieces.
Exactly. Let's see what else do I want to ask you? So what are, obviously you were saying earlier, the best time to start doing it is now. But let's say you actually have a budget and you are actually going to be spending some time going through an agency to help you through this. What are some things that you should have? I don't want to say ready to go, because I'm sure you've seen some folks that, they are literally coming to you and they don't know at all what they're doing. But preferably, what are some things that you should kind of have ready before you get to that agency? What are some things that you should know ahead of time?
It depends on what the project is. Like, 'cause we handle multiple things, whether it's just social campaigns or brand identity. Obviously, if you need a brand identity, you are going to have a lot coming to the table with, aside from just your story. And, a good agency is going to be able to walk you through exploring that if you don't even have ways to verbalize it yet. So you'll gain that through some workshopping and figuring that out. If we're talking a web project, um, the biggest advice I can give that I see all the time is make sure it comes after your rebrand's done. I
Okay.
don't know how many projects we've had where it's like, okay, let's get going. Let's build it. Here's what we want. Here's what we like. We'll get you the branding. It should be finished in a couple months. And it's like, again, like I'm all for keeping things cohesive. I
Mhm.
want that messaging across the board, no matter what a user or a
Mhm.
patron's going to interact with that brand. I mean, my goal, I always tell clients, is that I want the experience on the website to reflect the ethos of who you are, whether they're in a store, whether they're seeing your ad on a billboard.
Yeah.
And you take that power away from what I can do for you when I don't have any of those tools.
Mhm.
So I think just having that together prior, a website is one arm of the product that you're building through that branding. Let's spend the time to get that locked down
Mhm.
first. So
Okay.
otherwise, just come together with kind of your ideas thought through and kind of where you want to go, and then utilize the agency or the partner's experience. You're paying them, in some cases, a lot of money to be there for you. Um, Listen to what they have to tell you. It might be different than what you went into thinking,
Mhm.
and it could be pretty valuable. I think it's a shame sometimes when different clients can spend a lot of money for user research, even like
Mhm.
your actual users are telling you this. And then in the end being like, yeah, I still want to do this. And you're like, okay, but I mean, it's not even me saying it. It's your users. So we
Mhm.
got to be open-minded to know that we don't have it all figured out. I mean, I have to do that on my end. And I think it's scary when clients aren't doing that on their end to really try and explore,
Mhm.
to take advantage of what can really help as well as sell.
Exactly. Listen to your customers. So
Yeah.
one last question, Lynn, like, because we haven't talked about this, but I was just curious, like, how do you measure all of this? How do you measure that you're not so much that you're being compliant? Obviously, you can find like checklists and things like that, but how do you measure that it's being effective?
Yeah. And that's the tricky part, right? When I was hearing about, we need to do this, I mean, it was early on, we would have requests from more financial government sites would have a very specific requirement. So it's like, okay, we need to do that for that. But for everybody else, it doesn't matter so much. And then it started to be around
Mhm.
some of the lawsuits were happening. And really what I found was there was no rule. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not codified into law.
Right.
But what people were doing is like, what was the last biggest lawsuit? What happened there? Okay. So that's kind of the latest thing we need to watch out for. And when I dug into it, the best I could find was that if a company is selling goods on their site and you can from start to finish purchase those goods, it needs to be accessible. And it's only more important if you have a brick and mortar as well doing the same. For some reason, there's higher visibility there. There was a big one with Domino's that you may have heard of.
Mhm.
But the last big one I found was this grocery chain called Winn-Dixie, which I guess is big.
Mhm.
You may be familiar, not so much around here, like a Fred Meyer or
Right.
type place, but they had a big lawsuit, and
Mhm.
they actually won it because you could start things on the website, but you couldn't see it through to the end. You always had to finish that process in store. And so I think that kind of process of just being able to do the thing from the beginning all the way through to the end is
Mhm.
where you really need to be careful. Again, that's excluding thinking about others that have disabilities in general and wanting to make the world a better place. But for the logistics of it, you really need to make sure that that's the case. And then a lot of the rulings, I found like
Mhm.
75% of federal claims reference the WCAG 2.1 double A criteria. So that's kind of where we land as an agency on what we recommend as the minimum, and we're always trying to do and what we
Mhm.
recommend to others. It's highly unlikely that you would run into a lawsuit if you were meeting that requirement. So that's kind of where we reference it, but it's not codified in the law at all. Again, so it can be a bit subjective. Results may
Yeah.
vary. I found, I think it was New York, California, and one other state had piggybacked some laws around it where you could gain extra money back around lawsuits. And so in those states specifically, I tell people if you're doing business there, your chance is higher because there's more incentive to push those through litigation. So you want to be careful there. And then the retail market, if you're a retail business, you're generally going to have a brick and mortar, but web presence, you need to make sure you're really paying attention to that stuff. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's simple, like you just alt text. Simply,
start there. Yeah.
Start there. Go into the photos that you have on your website. Update the alt text. If there's anything there that you can do, do it. Yeah, and like you said earlier, if you have any photo or graphic that has wording on it, remove it and have like a little not a tagline, but a what's the word? Caption.
A caption or yeah.
Yeah. Text on photo is no good anymore. It's just no good.
Yeah, and some of it, it's hard too, because I know like some of the WordPress sites, they'll auto-populate maybe your blog post title, and it might just be regurgitated. And it's eye-opening to run screen reader software over your site.
Yeah.
And you really realize you really want each image, explain it to like you're explaining it to your grandma on the other end of a phone, what this picture is of. Because that's what's going to matter to that person trying to envision what you're saying. So, and it all helps SEO. It all helps the greater good. It helps your site load faster. I mean, all these things have benefits that go deep beyond just trying to not get sued, right? So,
yeah. And if the photo or graphic doesn't need to be there, take it out. Take it out. Fine. You're not going to be penalized. So we're kind of closing up, but is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to mention, or is there anything that you want to reiterate to the audience that you really feel is important?
Good question. I think we kind of touched on everything. I mean, it's such a deep topic. It's hard to cover all of it. Ultimately, just start the conversations. And it goes deeper beyond just like vision impairedness, mobility impairedness. I mean, this can go deep into just inclusivity, thinking about the photography we're using. Is it only one people group? Are we thinking about more people than who just looks like us? I mean, and there's places you can start. Like I'm just one cog in the wheel in some cases of a process. And early on, I didn't have a big voice around it, but I do mock-ups. I show people what stuff could look like. So I could be like, well, I'm going to think about what I'm presenting, what pictures I'm using, how, think deeper about that. And it will lead to bigger conversations that I think can really make a greater good. But the sooner we think about this early on in a marketing plan or what we're trying to do with a project, and then getting intelligent people that can speak to those pieces in the room, everything's going to perform better. Everything's going to look better. It's just going to be better all the way around. So my biggest takeaway that I have for people is have empathy, ask questions, and think about it before you need that website built, because you've probably spent a lot of money on other materials at that point that could really use this as well.
Exactly. This is all very, very, very important information. And I really appreciate your time today, kind of talking through it, because you're the first person we've actually, fully talked about this. We've touched on it in past episodes, but it's a continual conversation. So thank you so much. And
absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah, we have your links in the description below. And good news, you get to see Marth at Market Mix, August 25th, less than 2 months. Get your tickets. Early bird tickets end tomorrow. So tickets will go up. Be sure to get your tickets. And also we're going to be doing we already do live coffee talks, but we will have a live audience at Market Mix. So we'll be filming an episode there. Guest is to be determined because it's going to be a surprise. So yeah, that's all good stuff. I have everything linked below. I have links to ADA as well as WCAG linked below as well if you want to learn more and have a reference. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is today is June 30th. It is the last day of the fiscal year for a lot of people today. So please be kind. We're heading into a long weekend. To all of my AMA fellow leaders, we did it. Another great year. Good job. And we're going to have another great year. I'm so very excited. Other than that, if you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button, subscribe. Please subscribe. I would really appreciate it so you don't miss any of our content. We'll be back next week where you get to meet the new board of the fiscal year. So thank you all so much. Marth, thank you again. I appreciate
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Take care,
Awesome.
everybody.
You too. Have a great weekend.
You too.